A gray sky loomed over a small college town in Texas, the streets slick with rain. Daniel walked along the sidewalk, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his face etched with worry. At 23, he was juggling his final year of law school, a part-time job, and an avalanche of debts left by his late father. Every day, the weight of the world seemed to press down on him harder. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking his train of thought. "Daniel speaking," he answered. A composed, authoritative voice responded. "Daniel, this is Miriam Brooks. I'd like to meet with you to discuss your financial situation." Daniel frowned. "I'm sorry, who are you? And how do you know about—" "I know enough," she interrupted smoothly. "Meet me at Brooks Bistro at 7 p.m. It's important." Before Daniel could protest, the call ended. Confused but intrigued, he decided to go. The rain fell harder as Daniel arrived at the upscale cafe. His jacket did little to keep him dry. Stepping inside, he was greeted by warm lighting and the aroma of fresh coffee. In the corner sat Miriam Brooks, a striking woman with silver hair styled impeccably. She was dressed in a tailored suit that radiated wealth. "Mark," she greeted him, gesturing for him to sit. Her tone was calm yet commanding. Daniel hesitated before sitting opposite her. "Mrs. Brooks, what's this about?" "Straight to the point." "Good," she said, sipping her tea. "Daniel, I know about your debts, the ones your father left behind. I know you're barely scraping by. I'm here to offer you a solution." Daniel's brows furrowed. "And what would that be?" She set down her cup and met his gaze with piercing blue eyes. "Marry me." The words hung in the air, heavy and surreal. Daniel blinked, sure he had misheard. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she said, her voice steady. "This isn't about romance. It's a business arrangement. I'll pay off all your debts and ensure your financial security. In return, you'll be my husband." Daniel let out a disbelieving laugh. "You're serious? Why me? You don't even know me." Miriam leaned forward slightly. "Exactly. You're young, unattached, and desperate enough to consider this. I don't need love, Daniel. I need a companion, someone to share my name and my estate, nothing more. Think of it as a contract." Daniel shook his head, his mind racing. "This is insane. What's in it for you?" Her expression softened for the first time. "I've spent my life alone, Daniel. I have no children, no family left. I want companionship, even if it's just for appearances. And I want control of my legacy. A husband will help solidify that." He stood abruptly, the chair scraping the floor. "I can't. I need time to think." "Of course," she replied coolly. "But don't take too long. The offer won't stand forever." That night, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his mother. Her pale face was etched with worry as he explained Miriam's proposition. The cost of her treatments had drained their finances, and his younger sister's tuition loomed like a dark cloud. "Daniel," his mother said softly, "I know it sounds unthinkable, but if she's willing to help, maybe it's worth considering." Daniel stared at his hands, torn between his pride and his desperation. "You're asking me to marry a woman I don't love just to solve our problems?" "I'm asking you to save yourself," she said, her voice trembling. "To save us." The following morning, Daniel returned to the bistro. Miriam was already there, her demeanor as composed as before. "You decided?" she asked without looking up from her tablet. Daniel took a deep breath. "I'll do it." She smiled faintly, setting down her tablet. "Good. The arrangements will be made immediately." A week later, Daniel stood in a small courthouse, dressed in a suit Miriam had provided. The ceremony was quiet, witnessed only by her lawyer and a notary. As they exchanged vows, Daniel couldn't shake the unease in his chest. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Miriam turned to him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome to your new life, Daniel," she said. As they left the courthouse, rain drizzling once more, Daniel caught his reflection in a puddle. He wondered, have I just saved my family or sold my soul? The gates to Elon Brooks' estate creaked open as Daniel's cab rolled up the long driveway. The house loomed ahead, a sprawling mansion that could easily pass for a museum. Its towering columns and pristine stone facade exuded old money, but its windows seemed dark and lifeless. Daniel stepped out, suitcase in hand, feeling like a visitor in someone else's dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Miriam greeted him at the door. The grand foyer of the mansion was as imposing as the rest of the estate. Miriam stood waiting, her polished demeanor unshaken. "Welcome, Daniel," she said, her formal tone sending a shiver down his spine. "I trust you'll find everything to your satisfaction. Dinner is at 7. Daniel nodded mutely and followed a housekeeper who led him to his room. The space was opulent, a king-sized bed, antique furnishings, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens. Yet, despite its luxury, the room felt cold, untouched by any trace of warmth. That evening, Daniel sat stiffly at the long dining table. Miriam was seated at the other end, impeccably dressed in a silk blouse and pearls. The food was extravagant, prepared by a chef he hadn't seen and served by staff who moved with silent precision. "I trust you're settling in," Miriam said as she cut into her filet mignon with surgical precision. "It's different," Daniel replied cautiously. "This place is huge. Feels like I'll get lost." Miriam smirked. "You'll get used to it or you won't. Either way, you're here." Daniel bristled at her bluntness. "You didn't mention much about your late husband before." Miriam's knife paused mid-cut. She dabbed her mouth with a napkin before speaking. "He was a businessman, like your father. Their paths crossed once or twice." Her tone darkened. "But, as you might imagine, not all encounters end well." Daniel's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Her sharp eyes met his. "Let's just say unfinished business has a way of lingering." She picked up her glass of wine. "But that's in the past. You'll soon understand why I chose you." Her cryptic words left Daniel uneasy. After dinner, he wandered through the mansion's vast halls. The house was eerily quiet, save for the faint creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. Several locked doors caught his eye, their brass handles gleaming in the dim light, as though guarding secrets he wasn't meant to uncover. As the days passed, Daniel grew more unsettled. The staff avoided his gaze, speaking in hushed tones when they thought he wasn't listening. He overheard snippets of conversations that made his stomach twist. Why him? Does he even know? She never does anything without a reason. He'll figure it out eventually. They always do. One evening, while pacing in the library, Daniel noticed Miriam's desk. Papers were strewn across its surface, along with a small, ornate key. The key gleamed under the desk lamp, its intricate design catching his eye. He glanced around the room, no one was there. Heart pounding, he reached for it. The key was heavier than he expected, cool to the touch. Could this unlock one of the mysterious doors? That night, lying in his luxurious yet suffocating room, Daniel turned the key over in his hands. A million questions swirled in his mind, but one loomed above all. What is Miriam hiding, and why did she really choose me? The mansion was shrouded in silence as Daniel crept down the hallway. The key felt like a lead weight in his pocket, its cool surface pressing against his thigh. His pulse quickened as he approached one of the locked doors, its ornate handle glinting faintly in the moonlight. Glancing over his shoulder, Daniel inserted the key into the lock. The soft click reverberated through the stillness, sending a chill down his spine. Slowly, he pushed the door open. The room beyond was like a time capsule, frozen in another era. Dusty furniture and faded wallpaper surrounded him. On a table, tarnished silver frames displayed photographs of happier times: Miriam as a young woman, a man who must have been her late husband, and another couple Daniel didn't recognize. But it was the stack of papers on the desk that caught his attention. Flipping through them, his eyes widened. Legal documents detailed failed business deals between Miriam's husband and Daniel's father. One letter, written in sharp, slanted handwriting, accused Daniel's father of fraud. "You ruined everything. My family was left with nothing because of your lies." His breath hitched as he noticed the last page, a marriage license. His name and Miriam's were printed on it, stark against the paper. It was dated weeks before their wedding, far earlier than he had known. On the desk lay an old, leather-bound diary. Hesitating, Daniel opened it. The entries were Miriam's, revealing a calculated plan to trap him in a marriage designed to fulfill her ultimate goal, to settle old scores. I will take everything from him, just as his father did to me. He will be my pawn. A creak behind him froze Daniel in place. Enjoying yourself? Miriam's icy voice sliced through the shadows like a blade. Daniel spun around, guilt and fear written across his face. Miriam, you thought you'd find answers here? She stepped into the room, her silhouette sharp against the dim light from the hallway. Curiosity killed the cat, Daniel. What do you think you're doing? His voice was low but firm. Why did you really marry me? Is this about my father? Is this some kind of revenge? Miriam's eyes hardened, her composed facade cracking. It's not your place to ask questions, Daniel. Just do as you're told, and you'll leave this marriage better off than you started. Isn't that enough for you? Daniel's fists clenched. Enough? You've lied to me, manipulated me. This isn't a marriage, it's a trap. Miriam's lips curled into a faint smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. A trap, is it? Perhaps you should have been more careful about the deals you inherit. Late that night, Mark lay in bed, his thoughts a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Miriam's cutting words echoed in his mind, but even more troubling were the damning documents and diary he had discovered in the locked room. It was clear he had been dragged into something far darker than he could have imagined. The grand estate, once an imposing symbol of wealth and power, now felt like a gilded prison, its luxury masking a web of secrets. Unable to sleep, Mark crept toward Miriam's study. As he pressed his ear to the door, he caught the tail end of a conversation. Make sure the transfer is complete, Miriam said, her tone sharp and commanding. We can't let him back out now. Time is running out. Mark's blood ran cold. Whatever she was planning, it was clear he was a pawn in a much larger scheme. The next morning, Mark approached Mr. Dixon, the estate's head butler. The older man, with his calm and stoic demeanor, seemed to know more than he let on. Mr. Dixon, Mark began hesitantly, I need your help. Something isn't right here. The butler studied him for a moment, his hands clasped neatly behind his back. I was wondering how long it would take before you came to me, Mr. Harris, he replied. You know something, don't you? Mark pressed. About Miriam, about all of this? Mr. Dixon hesitated before answering. You're not the first young man to be drawn into Miriam's world. She is clever, resourceful, and ruthless when it comes to achieving her goals. He leaned in slightly, his voice lowering. My advice? Watch your back. Mark's chest tightened. If you know what she's capable of, why are you still here? A flicker of regret crossed Mr. Dixon's face. Some of us don't have the luxury of walking away, he said simply. Determined to find a way out, Mark began devising a plan. He reached out to Peter, a trusted friend from law school, under the guise of discussing a hypothetical scenario. Peter, Mark asked casually during their call, if someone signed a contract under coercion or false pretenses, could they void it? Peter paused. Hypothetically, yes. But it depends on the evidence. Why? Are you in some kind of trouble? Mark deflected with a nervous chuckle. No, it's just for a class project. Thanks, man. Over the next few days, Mark searched Miriam's office whenever she was away, hoping to uncover something that would explain her obsession with his father. Late one night, he found an envelope hidden in a drawer. Inside was a letter addressed to his father, written by Miriam herself. The letter was a scathing condemnation. It accused Mark's father of embezzlement, fraud, and deceit, actions that led to the financial ruin of Miriam's family and the death of her husband. You left us with nothing, the letter read. My husband's heart couldn't take the stress, and now he's gone because of you. I will make sure your family pays for what you've done. Mark's stomach churned. Miriam's actions weren't just about reclaiming her fortune. They were about exacting revenge, fueled by years of pain and anger. Returning the letter to its hiding place, Mark resolved to act. He couldn't allow Miriam to use him as a tool for her vendetta. That night, he began mapping out possible escape routes from the estate. But Miriam's sharp instincts caught wind of his unease. The next morning, she confronted him, her icy gaze pinning him in place. Enjoying yourself, Mark? she asked, her voice dripping with venom. Mark glared at her, his resolve hardening. Why did you really marry me? Is this about my father? Is this some kind of revenge? Her lips curled into a faint, humorless smile. You may think you're smart, Mark, but you're just like your father, blind to the damage you cause until it's too late. If you hated him so much, why take it out on me? Mark demanded. I had nothing to do with what he did to your family. Miriam stared at him, her composure cracking for the first time. Finally, she turned on her heel. You're in over your head, Mark. Stay out of matters that don't concern you. As she walked away, her footsteps echoing down the hall, Mark knew one thing for certain. He had to find a way to escape before it was too late. The morning air in the grand estate was heavy with tension as Maya entered the breakfast room, her icy presence piercing the silence. You've been busy, haven't you? She remarked, her voice carrying a dangerous edge. Raymond froze, his spoon hovering midair. I don't know what you're talking about, he replied, feigning innocence. Maya's smile was cold, calculated. Don't play coy with me, Raymond. If you think you can outsmart me, you're sorely mistaken. I've dealt with far craftier opponents. Raymond swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm not doing anything wrong. Leaning closer, her tone dropped to a venomous whisper. If you betray me, you'll wish you hadn't. Remember that. She straightened, her words hanging like a storm cloud, and left the room. Left alone, Raymond grappled with a crushing realization. Escaping Maya's grasp might be more dangerous than staying, but surrendering his life to her twisted plans was a fate he couldn't accept. That afternoon, as he paced the library, the weight of his discoveries pressed heavily on his shoulders. A private investigator he had quietly hired had uncovered the devastating truth. Maya's late husband, Harold, had been a victim of Raymond's father's fraudulent real estate deal. The swindle had ruined the Brooks family and contributed to Harold's death from a heart attack shortly afterward. For Maya, the marriage proposal had been more than a calculated scheme. It was revenge, a means to make Raymond's family pay for the sins of the past. Raymond clenched his fists, anger coursing through him. How can she blame me for something I didn't do? He muttered to himself. But as much as he resented Maya's actions, he couldn't ignore the pain that had driven her. Later that evening, Raymond met his trusted friend Peter, a fellow law school graduate, in secret. Together, they reviewed the evidence Raymond had collected from Maya's office and the investigators' findings. The documents revealed that Maya's current business dealings bordered on illegal, involving shady partnerships and falsified reports aimed at rebuilding her wealth at any cost. Peter studied the papers intently. This is enough to take her down, but you need to be careful. If she catches on, there's no telling what she might do. Raymond nodded grimly. She's already done enough damage. It's time to end this. The next morning, Raymond confronted Maya in the grand sitting room. The evidence was securely tucked in his bag as he stood to face her. We need to talk, he said firmly. Maya raised an eyebrow, her tone clipped. What could possibly be so urgent? Raymond pulled out the documents and held them up. I know everything. About my father, about Harold, and about what you've been doing to rebuild your fortune. For the first time, Maya's composed exterior faltered. Her eyes flicked to the papers in his hand. You've been snooping, haven't you? She said coldly. Do you even understand what your father did to my families? Raymond stepped closer, his voice rising. I understand that he wronged you. But what about the people you've hurt along the way? What about me? I didn't deserve this. Maya's jaw tightened. And my family didn't deserve to lose everything. My husband didn't deserve to die of stress and heartbreak while your father lived comfortably. Don't talk to me about fairness. Raymond's hands trembled as he responded. Revenge won't bring him back, Maya. And it won't undo what happened. You've spent your life consumed by this, hurting innocent people, ruining lives. When does it end? For a moment, Maya's shoulders sagged, and a flicker of regret crossed her face. You remind me of him, you know, she said softly. Harold. That same fire, that same stubbornness. I didn't expect to feel anything for you, Raymond. But here we are. Caught off guard by her admission, Raymond hesitated. If you really feel that way, then stop this. Let it go before it's too late. Before Maya could respond, the sound of car tires crunching on gravel echoed outside. Moments later, uniformed police officers entered the room, followed by Peter. Maya Brooks, we have a warrant for your arrest. You're being charged with multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy, an officer announced. Maya's face hardened as she looked from the officers to Raymond. You called them? Raymond met her gaze, his voice steady. You left me no choice. As the officers led her away, she turned back to him one last time. You may think you've won, Raymond, but revenge isn't so easily undone. Be careful it doesn't consume you. 2. Watching her go, Raymond felt a mixture of relief and sadness. He had exposed the truth and freed himself, but Maya's parting words lingered, casting a shadow over his victory. Would the weight of their shared past ever truly fade? Weeks later, the sharp bang of a gavel echoed through the courtroom, signaling the end of Maya Brooks's trial. Sitting silently in the back row, Raymond watched as the once commanding woman was escorted away, her icy facade finally shattered. For Raymond, it was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, a chance to rebuild his life, free from the chains of his father's mistakes and Maya's vendetta. But the scars of the past remained, a reminder that justice and healing often come at a cost. As Mark sat in the back row of the courtroom, watching Miriam face the consequences of her actions, the weight of everything that had happened settled heavily on him. His testimony, though not out of sympathy, had helped reduce her sentence. He understood the complexity of their shared history. Miriam turned briefly in her seat, her gaze meeting Mark's for the first time since their journey began. There was no trace of the cold calculation that had defined her before. Instead, she gave him a faint, almost apologetic nod. Days later, Mark was summoned to the estate one final time. The grand house that once felt so intimidating and isolating now seemed empty. Miriam had arranged for him to receive the property's deed. The estate lawyer handed Mark a letter in Miriam's elegant handwriting. It was never about the money, Mark. It was about closure. Harold deserved justice, but I lost sight of what truly mattered. You've shown me something I thought I'd forgotten, the capacity to move forward. This estate is no longer a monument to my pain. It can be something more. Use it well. Mark sold the estate. The decision came easily. Its grandeur had been a gilded cage for both him and Miriam. The proceeds allowed him to pay off his family's debts, finally freeing his mother from the shadow of his father's mistakes. With the remainder of the funds, Mark established a scholarship fund in Harold Brooks's name, a way to honor the man who had unknowingly become a casualty in the feud between two families. Mark's return to law school felt like a homecoming. This time, he was more determined than ever to use his education for good. He interned at a legal aid center, helping individuals who, like Miriam, had been wronged and left without recourse. One crisp autumn afternoon, a letter arrived for Mark. The handwriting was instantly recognizable. He sat on a park bench near campus, unfolded the paper, and read, Mark, I've had much time to reflect. For years, I believed that revenge would heal the wounds Harold's death left behind. But I see now that revenge is its own prison. Your kindness, even in the face of my mistakes, taught me something I never expected. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is strength. Thank you for being better than the world around you. Thank you for showing me that we can break the cycles we inherit. I hope you find the happiness I never could. Mark stared at the letter for a long time. The words sank in. He folded it carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket, feeling an odd sense of peace. A year after Miriam's arrest, Mark stood before a group of scholarship recipients at a small ceremony. Behind him hung a simple plaque, the Harold Brooks Scholarship Fund for Second Chances. Mark spoke with conviction. This fund isn't just about money. It's about creating opportunities for those who might otherwise be forgotten. It's about turning pain into purpose. After the ceremony, he sat alone for a moment, reflecting on the whirlwind of the past year. His path had been irrevocably altered, but for the first time, he felt like he was walking in the right direction. As he walked away from the ceremony, a soft smile on his face, Mark glanced up at the clear sky. He felt the weight of the past finally lifting. Eleanor's letter remained in his pocket, a quiet reminder of the lessons they both learned about redemption, justice, and the transformative power of forgiveness. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of resilience, redemption, and forgiveness. Mark's story reminds us that even in the face of betrayal and hardship, the choices we make can lead us to healing and new beginnings. If this story touched your heart and left you inspired, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends and loved ones. Let's spread the message of hope and second chances far and wide. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more heartfelt tales that move your soul and remind us all of the power of compassion, forgiveness, and love. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time with another soul-stirring story. Until then, take care and remember to cherish the lessons life brings.